Good morning. So I've got a very special panel next, and as we've got to get a couple of them mic'd up, the ones that are ready, if you'd like to come up and make your way to the stage. If you weren't there on Tuesday night, we had a very special night for TU-Automotive. We had an inaugural Hall of Fame, and this was really created to recognise the work of those people in the industry whose long-term vision, commitment, passion has really shaped the evolution of this industry and takes us to where we are today at what we agree is such an exciting point in the evolution of this industry. And we had them all in town, and we thought it would be a waste not to get them to share some of their insights and some of the things that they've learned through their vast experience within this industry. I would introduce them all, but I think it would take probably quite a long time, and they are the Hall of Fame after all, so I think they don't need too much introduction. And if the planning discussion over the past couple of weeks and a few minutes ago is anything to go by, I think we're going to need every single second we have over the next 30 minutes. But whilst we were planning this, I think Fran said a very good point. He said, the panelists should not take a walk down memory lane, but be challenged to see if the elders, that's his words, not mine, had any wisdom they could share with the tribe. And I do really agree. This next 30 minutes isn't supposed to be a nostalgia fest, some story swapping. Really, we want to get some really good takeaways from their experience, what they've learned over the years, because whilst we acknowledge that things have never been as fast as they are in the industry today, many of the challenges that they've faced and many of the trends that they've seen actually are quite cyclical. And we can learn a lot from what we've seen in the past. And also, I know they have a lot of opinions on where we're going as well. So without further ado, I think we should, whilst not being nostalgic, we can still use the narrative of their careers to start off. And what I think is good, none of them actually work for the organizations that they were maybe most recognized as working for over the years. So we're going to get the truth. Kevin did promise the most explosive panel debate we've ever had. So no pressure. So I think let's start at the beginning. And I'm going to go to the guys that worked in the OEMs first, so Fran and John. What was it like back in the day trying to get this fledgling technology off the ground and trying to change and bring innovation into one of these huge organizations?
I can take it, Fran. So I thank God we had the mandate from Akio Toyota, but to marshal the support of an entire enterprise and launch something completely new, completely unknown to the greater Toyota and all the different silos within the company, and to pull together the mass of partners that we needed to do and the talent within was something overwhelming. It was just unbelievable. And then you get down to the dealer body, and these folks are working hard every day to sell and to service their vehicles and to train and to give them the different versions of the training with the different iterations, and to get them as evangelists as we were was incredibly challenging. Yeah.
And Fran?
We had an expensive piece of hardware we had to put in our cars. We had to add value to the consumer. One of our things, we brought Bluetooth into the car early. So BMW is an innovative company. We were small, very concise team. We all worked very, very hard. But we were having to really buck a lot of issues here of recurring costs to the organization. It was a hard sell. It took a lot of time, a lot of explanation. So the bean counters were tough. The dealers were also tough. We had to explain it to them. We brought features for the dealers to communicate the vehicle needs back to the dealers when the cars needed servicing. So these were little things we figured out along the way to add value to consumers and add value to the organization.
So I think you've all at some point in your careers been up here and done a presentation on behalf of the organization that you were working for at the time. What were you telling us at the time and keeping a bit secret from the industry that you can now tell us, that lift the curtain back, so to speak, and tell us what was really going on behind the doors in the OEMs in those nascent days of the telematics industry?
We were pulling our hair out. I had a full head of hair when I started this. And again, it was just trying to get the groups together to sort of the disparate pieces of the orchestra, and as a maestro, and I was a business unit lead, and let's face it, there were a lot of smart people who worked on my team, both business and sales and administration and engineering and technology, but get all of these things to sort of play the same notes that is on the music in front of us. And I think that's what was behind my scene, is to try to get all that working in concert.
At our time, BMW North America was, our project was very much local. Munich actually came on board along with us after we were successful. there's a panel member, it's not here, who's a award, Chet Huber from OnStar. OnStar really broke the door open for a lot of us because that company, General Motors, deserves a lot of credit for bringing this out, and then the competitive performance was an essential thing.
Okay, so the other guys on the other side of the fence, from the outside in, looking towards the OEMs, what was it like trying to work with them? Was it a struggle? And what were you thinking whilst you were having those initial meetings?
So I think these guys are being really kind. They had no idea what they wanted. So we're on the other side of the fence trying to position ourselves, and these guys would send out RFPs, and they had no idea what they wanted. And so we're trying to respond, but it's no disrespect to them. It's the fact that the industry was changing so much that they would lean on us to respond to an RFP about what should they do. And they would learn from that, and then they would push the envelope, which in effect pushed us, to try to see where that magic point was of what can I get within this budget. And so they would push and push and push to see what they could get for a price point. That pushed us, what could we build and build and build to get to a price point. So it's easy now to talk about it, but you go through a lot of RFPs where you're doing nothing but educating, but you're stretching the thinking and you're trying to find that magic balance in a solution that is, a practical solution for a practical price point. That was hard. We now get all of that, and it still goes on today.
So I'm not sure we truly do get all of that. We spent a lot of time, and I guess I got all my gray hair during this time, trying to come up with innovative products to go beyond the initial safety and security solutions that were present in the industry today. We were trying to impress the OEMs with additional services, and I very distinctly remember one of our partners looking over his glasses at me saying, "We'll reflash cars over my dead body."
So has anything really changed? Like, it's not that long, looking back, that's 15, 20 years ago, but in the more recent time, that relationship between the supplier and the OEM, has that evolved, or are we still seeing that same kind of dynamic between the two?
Well, the OEMs are still issuing RFPs like right before a holiday, right? No, they're not.
That's just mean.
I can't remember how many holidays that I spent responding to RFPs in the early years. Thanksgiving and Christmas, it was an RFI, then it was an RFP. So they the same OEM not only ruined your Thanksgiving, but there went Christmas and the New Year's.
And Scott, from your perspective, maybe from that more governmental regulation side, when you first saw the opportunity in this industry, how were you seeing things?
Well, back in 2000, we formed a consortium of all 12 automakers to develop all the specifications for how you would communicate inside the vehicle. And so the Bluetooth hands-free profile came out of that work. What's now the SAE common message set was developed there. The in-vehicle network architecture ISO spec was written by that group. In 2004, when we finished all that work, I sat down with the automakers and said, now that you've consensus on how to communicate inside the car, you need to work on communicating outside the car, not necessarily to the driver or occupant, but car to car. So incorporated a new entity form called the VII Consortium. We wrote a $54 million cooperative agreement with the federal government. That took a little bit of a challenge because the first time I went to DC to talk to the US DOT, we sat down and said, look, we know that you want to work with the automakers to build out what we now call the vehicle safety message sets. But we need to have an industry meeting because there's a lot of entities involved in this whole ecosystem. There's networking, there's processing, there's backhaul. And they were very polite, listened to us, and threw me out. And I got back home, and a couple of the automakers called me up and said, hey, Jeff Paniana called us and asked us if we knew who we were. We said yes. We told him to go see him. And so in February 2005, they held the first meeting on this for the public. And then in 2005, I actually coined the term connected vehicle and trademarked it, which I released in 2010 for everyone to use. But the evolution over this period has been very organic. We've had to discover the things that worked, the things that didn't work. We've had to deal with all of the companies that only deal with, I sell something for Wi-Fi, so therefore the connected vehicle's only Wi-Fi, or I deal with just cellular, so that's all that it is. And it really isn't. It's any bidirectional form of communication using any communication protocol. The security aspects have been around for quite a long time. I've chaired the security subcommittee for the Secretary of Transportation since 2012. And there are threats that we're trying to look at and evolve. It hasn't made the public aware until the last year or two, but that's the right time for it to occur. Looking at it 4 years ago was understanding if there was a potential problem. Looking at it now is how do we fix the problem? So that's what we're seeing going forward. Now when you start integrating ADAS and heads-up displays and levels of autonomy into the car, there is, believe it or not, an actual process that the automakers and the OEMs and the rest of the community use to do that. And it's important that all of those industries that are now coming into this space understand both that history and the process to how to move it forward.
Yeah, and you used the word evolution, but for you, was there and this goes out to the whole panel, was there a specific tipping point, a single moment in the industry, a specific technology that came out where you thought, you were validated, all this struggle that you've gone through, this was going to work out, and the connected vehicle telematics was actually something that was here to stay and had a serious effect in the future?
If I could give my perspective on that,
go
it happened when the industry collapsed.
Okay.
In the 2008-2009 timeframe, you had everyone trying to be the entire end-to-end value chain. Mm-hmm. After the economic collapse, the automotive community, all the tier ones, they went back and refocused on what their core competencies were, and they now started working with Silicon Valley. They started working with companies that were outside of this space. And I see that in terms of a relationship, not a technology point, but in terms of a business relationship where there was a fundamental shift in this environment.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
From Toyota's perspective, when Akio launched his Toyota division and the G-Book product in Japan, that became the tipping point for that OEM. We knew that we needed to get into this in a big way. He was a proponent of getting his global regions together to sponsor this and to promote it and to be evangelists globally. We were a first customer of OnStar in the US because we hadn't ramped up, we hadn't had the ecosystem members vetted yet. Credit Chet Huber, again, who isn't here, and I mean, he really is the man here in the US. But that for us was the tipping point. We knew we had to get into it. We knew we had to grow it. And again, we had a lot of naysayers and a lot of people to get on board with us.
I think it was the smartphone. I think it took telematics to a new dimension of connectivity because previous to that, telematics was basically a voice-based service. There was not a lot of data that was being shared with the customer. And the smartphone and the application world introduced a whole plethora of ways to connect with your car, whether it's in the aftermarket space that I give Fred credit for creating, or just getting diagnostic data. So I think that was a big tipping point.
Well, and I think too, when the OEMs saw so much technology flowing into just the connected world and the connected space, and the OEMs realized we can't control everything. Let's approach it with a more open mind, and let's see what these different suppliers and people with different business models bring to the table. And that seemed to be the tipping point. And Scott, to your point, it may have been with the economic collapse and automakers saying, let's stick to our knitting, but let's bring in other experts.
And you used the word connected world there, so I think that's a nice segue into the next section where we start to look at today. And over the last day and every day in the industry, the phrase IoT is used all the time. You can't get away from this phrase. But in many ways, automotive really was that initial pioneer. So really assessing and looking where we are today, where do you today see automotive in that wider connected world, that IoT landscape?
Let me just comment on that, because I think that this tipping, it ties in. Internet of Things that we really are now dealing with is bringing data into the vehicle. Smartphones, there was a huge issue of embedded versus bringing in, and now we all know it's both. We need both functions. We need an embedded SIM, an embedded communication, and bring in with your smartphone. But BMW's brought data into the car with real-time traffic information in 2006. Really value added, and it was already in Europe, but we brought it to America, and that added value. The other aspect was Google local search. When everybody knew about Google, we brought that into the car, both via the smartphone and via the device in the car with POI send to car. So these kinds of things, that was to me, a tipping point. We went from these voice services into data services as early as 2006, 2007 timeframe.
The internet, the car itself is going to be fundamental to the creation of the Internet of Things. Right now, the Internet of Things is a term we have that only exists anecdotally. It's your Fitbit talking to your phone or your Nest talking to your computer. When you look at the fact that a car can generate an exabyte of data, and when 5G is available, you'll be able to download an entire movie-length DVD in 3 seconds. And when you have increased processing power, if we continue along Moore's Law for just a few more years, what's going to happen is now you've got the car communicating information on the electric and hybrid to the smart grid. It's going to communicate it to the smart infrastructure. Eventually, we'll be needed to be using that information in smart cities for the management of their roadways. And so we see that the communication aspect of all of this data coming in and out of the car is actually going to be probably the fundamental aspect of how the Internet of Things communication protocols have to work, because it uses all communication protocols. It uses satellite, uses cellular, it uses Wi-Fi and the DSRC flavor of Wi-Fi. And when you look at that amount of massive data and the things that you can now do with it, pairing it with other databases, retail databases, social databases, you'll be able to generate new business through new customers, through new things that aren't even out there. Your lives will fundamentally change.
And are we honestly ready for this amount of data? We talk about it again in pretty much every discussion. Can we deal with it now, or have we still got a long way to go before we can really realize the power of this IoT data?
I just think of the enterprise, the pressure on the enterprise, from the OEM. I agree with Scott that the car is a fundamental part. I'm not sure it's the center of the universe. And with every inanimate object out there that has an IP address now, it places a great burden on all of us in this room to find the solution and make it simple and make it work and make the customer experience right for the customer. Otherwise, it's just going to be another cacophony of issues we have to deal with.
So the automotive industry needs to leverage the learnings of the IoT. We were the original IoT in every connected device, and what has to happen now as the next transition is we need to leverage all of the technologies that have been developed for the IoT space and move that technology into the car.
Yeah, and the car is just one node on the hub. It's the office, the home, the public infrastructure. So the car has to leverage and fit into that whole ecosystem. Even though we were first, we have to adapt to fit in that ecosystem.
And that adaptation is such an important topic right now. Every OEM is pretty much repositioning themselves as a tech company, as a mobility company. But if we're totally honest, and that's what we're up here to do, there's no vested interest, is this just headlines? Or are they seriously going about doing this and restructuring their whole business like we know they should be to really take advantage of this new era?
I can speak from the Toto side. It's not just smoke and mirrors. I mean, they're funding, they're investing, they're creating new strategic partnerships, and the people that are at the head of these new organizations that are coming together have been through the well-worn cart paths that I've been through, and the mandate is there, and this is not just headlines. They are repurposing their entire organization, and they're providing the funding, which is wonderful, which is great. We have to fight tooth and nail for it, and I think they're opening the coffers to a certain extent.
It cannot be lip service at all, because this is virtually survival industry with the new players, with Elon Musk and Tesla, with Google, with Apple, with all the new competitors coming in, and with the amount of automotive capacity in the industry has to change. I can speak for BMW. I'm a recent retiree, but it's been publicly announced. They totally re-engineered the engineering development organization and brought IT integral into that. And we know about how Ford is doing it. So it really is not lip service at all. So it's a new day.
You picked a couple of the really big disruptors we're talking about right now. So let's have a quick fire round, straight down the line, one word answer. In the next 5 years, who do you see, at which company do you see as being the biggest disruptor of the auto space? We'll start with you, John.
Google, just capital resources and manpower. And
that wasn't a one word answer, was
Sorry.
it? But anyway, Scott.
Apple.
Apple.
Google.
Oh.
Come on, I thought someone might go left field
audience.
there. All right then. Okay, who wants to start? Explain a little bit more about why you think Google and Apple will be those definitive disruptors.
Go ahead.
So I'll start with Apple. So if you look at Apple's development environment and what Apple has created, they have created mechanisms so that they can allow their developers, their partners, to very quickly develop new technologies, not to mention the fact that they have billions of dollars sitting in the bank ready to go.
So can we assume from this statement then, what you all identified, and we'll come back to your point there in a second, Fran, Silicon Valley companies. Does that mean we're saying that Silicon Valley is really going to be that leadership piece in the auto industry and leaving Detroit behind, or is that too simplistic?
I would say they're the innovator. I wouldn't call them the leader.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leadership, to run a company, to run a search engine, to run a company that makes handsets is completely different than creating an object that the misuse or the decay of it can kill you.
Does that amount of money get over that, though? I know it's a difficult task, but if you have that amount of money in the bank, is that a distance that you can actually travel a lot quicker?
But if you go out there and you spend time in the valley, and if you haven't done it, you need to put that on your list, to go out, they do events. Stanford does these events every week. The valley is full of events. If you go out there and just sit through these events, you'll come back completely invigorated, and you'll ask yourself, who's leading this innovation? Is it Detroit or the big autos, or is it the valley? And it's going to take both, but if you want to see creativity and innovation far faster than you can see it in this city, go spend a week. You owe yourself a week of doing that.
Well, and even beyond that, go rent a car and drive in Silicon Valley and go to Mountain View. And my daughter works at Google, and it's unbelievable when I'm out there and I'm in traffic and watching the way these driverless vehicles interact with its environment. I mean, I guess my favorite experience was watching a dog on the side of the road that was behaving bizarrely, and I was 2 cars behind a driverless vehicle, and I thought, well, that's not a predictable behavior. Let's see what this car does, and it responded perfectly to and the erratic behavior of a dog on the side of the road that ran into traffic. So it's amazing, but go drive out there. I agree, Kevin, you need to go see it.
So in defense of Detroit, building a car is a lot more complex than perhaps building a laptop or a tablet. But the first company I expected to fall on their face was Tesla, and the test of time has shown that they have built a pretty good product. It is very, very technologically advanced. We'll see over time if Detroit manages to keep the lead.
We talked about disruption, and I think we are dealing with disruption, but it's a good thing for our industry.
Yes.
Detroit, the automotive industry is going to manufacture vehicles. We're seeing this partnership emerging already with FCA and Google, FCA Uber. We all know enough about Apple's intentions and where they're headed. This is stimulating this. We're going to see development coming, really leadership in innovation coming out of that. The automotive industry is going to be doing the validation and the production, and there will be relationships there, much like a Flextronic and an Apple relationship.
So if I were to be very generous right now, and you're not allowed to use the answers Google or Apple, and I were going to give you $10 million, you're not allowed to invest it in any companies that you already may have an interest in, which company would you put your $10 million in today? Let's start with John again down the line.
Real quick.
I'm a fan of more data into the vehicle and more accurate data. I think the entity that is here today, I believe, Kymeta, the new antenna technology company, is someone to watch. Yeah.
Scott.
I'm sorry, I think it's inappropriate to name a company.
Come on.
All right. Who's
Did
willing?
you ask us to be
You're allowed
generic?
to abstain. Is anyone else going to venture an
I'm not
answer?
going to name a company, but I'm going to suggest someone who has embraced cloud technologies,
Okay.
because I believe the cloud technologies, and I'm talking about the true cloud, something like Amazon Web Services. Those services are beyond just a server in somebody's data center. True cloud technology, those are the places to start looking at, guys.
I'm going to give my $10 million. I'm going to go along with Tim Cook and put it into Didi in China, because the Chinese are going to really adopt autonomous vehicles.
Okay.
I'd go with an ADAS company. I'd go with Mobileye, somebody like that. Because all the other ones are overpriced, and I think the sensor technology that's going into ADAS would be a great investment for $10 million.
Okay. Kevin?
So based on this participation, I'm going with TU-Automotive.
Stop it.
Good investment.
So I would agree with Chuck, not because I actually taught him everything I know, but I think it's somebody in the IoT platform space. And I think that those platforms are going to get better and better and better. And for the automotive companies out there that are building their own, they've got to shed this opinion that it's got to be their own data center, their own technology. They've got to put these walls up around their data. They've got to get over that, because these platforms are so much more efficient, they're more effective, they're cheaper, and it'll help solve the business problem. Right now, everybody's building their own, garden and putting walls around it because they're scared of data.
But
So I
Gareth,
think platforms.
sorry, Kevin, but one more thing. When you were talking about Silicon Valley versus Detroit, my answer was going to be neither. Because I think we've got such a distributed world today, and I would think that in this room and at this conference, very few people are either from Silicon Valley or Detroit or the automaker world, and it's become very distributed. I mean, you can do the same things in Atlanta, what we've done in Atlanta, but throughout the country and throughout the world. I mean, you can have an impact on this industry from where you're located.
And if we're looking at that global picture, we were discussing it just before we came on stage, China has to obviously figure very big within this innovation picture, and I know some of you have some experience on that. So where do you really see them fitting in? And we were talking about autonomous vehicles as well. Is that really going to be the place where that technology is going to be accelerated faster than maybe what we're going to see here in the US?
It's going extremely fast. 3 weeks ago, I was appointed the chief advisor to the Beijing Autonomous Driving Project. They have 8 car companies with autonomous cars in October that they're driving live in real streets.
And why is it faster than here?
Because other areas of the world have the ability to leapfrog the steps that we've had to go through. In India earlier this year, they don't just have cars and trucks and tic-tics and scooters on the street. There are herds of water buffalo in Pune that come to and from in the morning. There are all of the panhandlers. There's, at one point, I passed a camel. I mean, and so you can't necessarily use the same technology. I mean, maybe you can put RFID, earrings in them or nose rings, but when you look at China, China's the only country in the world that's building a lot of roads. When you look at what they're looking at, they're saying they have a huge push on for 5G. They just had a test of 5G and shows that it has the same low latency of transmission as DSRC does. So it saves infrastructure.
But there's less, the risk-averse nature of the U.S. car companies, and no disrespect, I mean, I was with one, and regulatory environments they'll hold us back, and those don't seem to be as apparent, right?
They're not.
And that's the difference. In China, the government can just make a decision and it will be, and that's a lot different than our solutions here in the U.S., our government and our legislation in the U.S.
Having lived in Beijing for 3 years and throughout the megacities of China, traffic, unbelievable, like Mexico City, and pollution. So yes, the government is driving this forward, electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles for utilization. For the same reasons, we're really going to see it also hit in our megacities in America and other countries of the world, other cities in the world. It's going to happen quick.
I'm going to have one more quick-fire question before we open up to the floor and bring Slido up. In the US, in a meaningful sense, what date are we looking at to have autonomous vehicles on the road? And we'll start at Kevin and come back down the line this time.
I don't believe there's a big bang date. I think you'll see autonomous vehicles increasing in terms of feature and functionality over time. It's not like, New Year's on 2025, we're going to wake up and they're all going to be out there. It's going to happen over time, no big date.
Avoiding the question.
2026.
2026. Very specific. Any reason for the 6th?
October the 7th.
October the 7th. Mark that in your diary, everyone. We will hold you to that in 2 years' time.
And if I'm wrong, then you can come back and complain.
Okay.
Happy birthday.
First real vehicles, 2020. Real awareness and where we're starting to accept them in our society, 2025.
So I think 2020, you may have autonomous vehicles with the driver still sitting there with the ultimate control. It's probably going to be 10 years, 2025, 2026, before you have the ability to have that driverless autonomous vehicle.
Great.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with that date too, but understand, right now there are cars on the road. My car is already a level 2. It can steer and it can brake by itself. So we're going to see over the next 10, 15 years, levels 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the forecast by NHTSA is that we'll have personally driven cars through 2050.
John.
We're at the top of the Gartner hype cycle now, so it's about 5 to 10 years. I'm going to pick 8, and somewhere in the mid-20s.
That's just what I wanted to say. We are at the peak of the hype cycle on autonomous vehicles. We have some very tough years ahead of us. We're going to go through the trough of disillusionment. Taylor Kozlowski's not here to bring this message across. It's going to be tough for us, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen much quicker than anything else that's happened in the automotive industry. We are really on a paradigm shift.
And actually, we're running out of time, I think, to go to the floor, unfortunately. But in terms of, you've been there, you've done it, you've gone through the struggles, had the arrows fired at you. So if you can give one bit of advice to everyone out there right now, they're trying to get those solutions out there, build those partnerships, forward this technology, what would be your takeaway from your experience within the industry? Go on, Kevin.
Down the line.
So I guess I would say, you always have something you're going in to sell. And I was eager to try out my latest fancy PowerPoint and go in to sell my message. And sometimes that I would fail to listen to what the OEMs were providing feedback. So my advice is, it's lesson you learned in kindergarten, but listen as much as you're selling, because you will learn what their real interests are if you open up.
So I'd say ignore the rules, ignore the status quo, be brave to bring something into the industry that they haven't thought of.
Network, be open, be flexible, adapt your business model to the emerging changes.
So I'm going to agree with both Kevin and Fran. It's listen and be flexible. Work with the OEM. Give him what he wants.
Thank you.
Have a vision and believe in it.
Many of those in the room are asking OEMs to make a change, to switch horses in midstream, to get off of one service provider, one technology. I would say understand their system of play very well, their customers, and help make it easy for the OEMs to switch, work on rapid prototyping, and allow them to feel, taste, touch, and experience what you have beyond the PowerPoint wear.
Well, I'm sure we could go all day, but we've run out of time. So if you could join me in thanking our panel today.
Thank you.